I want to demonstrate a few ways to use India ink, especially if you are new to the material, just to give you some ideas to get started and show you what some of the possibilities are with the ink. So the materials I have out here are a sketchbook with mixed media paper. I have a couple of brushes. I have a round brush and a flat brush, or rather it's sort of a chisel tip brush. I have a paper towel. I have my ink. And I have 2 jars of water. I have one that I'm going to keep as my clean water and one that is going to be my dirty ink water. Okay, so I'm going to start with the round brush. And first, I'm just going to get the brush a little wet and then wipe it off on the paper towel. So the first thing with the ink, if I just dip the end of my brush in the ink, we can just draw, a thin line with our round brush. And it's a very, very black line using the ink directly from the container. Now I can make lighter lines as well by starting to dilute this ink in water. So I'm just going to dip it a little bit in the water. And you can see that I have a little bit lighter of a gray line. And I can dip it in more water. Didn't quite get enough out there. And there we have an even lighter line. Now if I take the flat or chisel tip brush, let me get it a little wet to begin with too. I can get a much wider stroke. You get a nice, thick, black, bold stroke dipped directly into the ink. But I can start to dilute it in the water as well and get a lighter line. And if I continue to go here and it gets drier, you'll see that I start to get some of these brush marks and brush lines to create an interesting texture in the ink. Okay, so those were all ink on brush directly onto your dry page. But let me clean off this brush and dip it into our clean water and get an area of the page wet. I'm going back in the ink with the round brush, and on my wet page, you can get some really interesting spreading effects with the ink. You see this in a lot of YouTube videos where they make like fuzzy cat tails and things. And when it dries, it's going to be a little paler than what you see here because the wetness, the water, is going to absorb some of that ink. But you can just continue, to layer. And I got a little messy there, but you can see it slowly spreading out. Likewise, that was a brush stroke, but if you just, let me get this wet again here, another area that's wet, sort of dab the color, you can see it spread, see the ink spread there as well. You can also, instead of starting with clear water, you can use an ink wash where it's a little darker and then go in and spread the ink throughout as well. Okay, then you can also play with your brush shape to create marks with ink. So I have this round brush here that starts thin, but if I push down and lift up, I can get some variety in my mark. And with the chisel brush, I can also use the shape of the brush to sort of change my line or change my mark. So now my dirty ink water isn't just dirty water to clean my brush, but it's really diluted ink. So you can use the ink water for some lighter values. India ink is also waterproof, so that allows you to come through and do some interesting things. So we're going to work on a little gradient here. I just put down a dark stroke, put one next to it with a little bit more water, a little bit more. And you can build up some gradients, but you'll see because the ink is waterproof, there's a little bit of a sort of a line running between each of my strokes where it started to dry a bit in between. If I clean this off well, if I go back to my original brush strokes, which are fairly dry at this point, you can see if I brush over them with water, nothing happens. They are waterproof. So those are just a few ways you can use India ink. It's a really versatile, really fun medium that can create a lot of different textures. And I love the fact that it's waterproof once it dries. Unlike watercolor, which works similarly, has some similar effects, but is much more delicate of a medium. So I hope you experiment with some India ink and have fun with it.